Hey guys, this is Ranger Jake Bowling at Kennesaw Mountain National Battlefield Park for our newest virtual museum tour. So as per usual, I am standing in our awesome museum in front of our, what we nickname our long case. It has a bunch of different artifacts in it. Today's program is going to be on Civil War musicians and a rough history of military music. The reason that we're doing the program on music is because of two really cool artifacts that we have in our collection. I'll get into the specifics of these later, and we'll have some close-up pictures of them to go along with the virtual program. But behind me, to my left here, is a Union infantry drum and a fife that both belong to musicians that were here at the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain. And again, I'll get into the details of those later and why they were important. So a brief history of music in the military. It's actually fairly interesting and dense history, but so we'll keep it kind of to the bullet points. As early as 200 AD, in some Roman armies, they had men who blow, they called anators, or they blew horns. And these were used to signal troop movements and to kind of help organize the men, okay? Fast forward a couple of hundred years in the 17th and 18th century and some of the British armies during the Napoleonic Wars, we have drums introduced to a variety of different horns, bugles, things like that. The drums were used because of the tactics being developed. The drums really helped to keep men, as they were marching or as they were in battle, to keep them kind of in unison and keep them moving with some level of consistency. Moving forward a little bit in time, we're going really quick here in the history here, but moving forward a little bit more in the Revolutionary War, we see kind of a more refinement, and we see what would turn into what we would see a little more in the Civil War. By this point, military musicians have kind of divided into two main categories. You have combat musicians like drummers and fifers and buglers that are really there and can be on the field, that can help troop movement, help signaling, help all sorts of things like that. And then you have musicians that are actually more for morale and playing music at camp and stuff like that. Now, we're going to focus more on the field musicians. General George Washington, during the Revolutionary War, orders, and seeing how specialized these roles are and seeing the real effect they have on battle, starts ordering all field musicians to go to specialized training. This is a huge step. This basically, instead of just having people that can play music, doing so is kind of on the side, this basically makes a completely different faction of the military, okay? This would carry over into the American Civil War. By the American Civil War, there is specific field training for musicians. One of the bigger field training schools was up in the Northeast. These men and sometimes young boys would learn the tactics of the day. They would learn not only to play the instrument, but to really communicate and there was a million different types of calls and tunes that they would play to signal different things to the men. Okay, so on the field, the musicians had a couple of different roles. As I mentioned earlier, the main roles for drummers, buglers, things like that on the field during the Civil War were to keep pace, to signal movement, to relay orders, okay? Retreat, move forward, flank left, flank right, things like that could be, the commander's voice might be lost in the din of battle. They could be communicated via drum or bugle. Okay, we all may be familiar with the Bugle Charge, the bugle call charge. Now, the roles of these musicians translated off the field as well. One of the most important jobs of a musician during the Civil War was actually during camp, or while the men were kind of resting, and that was kind of, they kind of acted as the alarm clock of the military. It made it to where the men could just have muscle memory. When they heard a certain beat or a certain drill on a fife, they knew it was time to get up, and they knew that they needed to get up and get moving before they heard the next one. They had to be ready for mess, or they had to be ready for if they heard the adjutant's call. They knew that someone in command was coming, and they needed to be prepared. Now, you might be thinking that it could be a very dangerous place on the battlefield for a musician, and that's 100% true, which is why sometimes the musicians were trained in support roles in some cases, which means that if you were not needed, so say you were a fifer that was in the middle of the thick of a really terrible battle, you may not be able to hear a fife call, but you could act in support roles such as carrying ammunition, helping the sick and wounded get off the battlefield, helping surgeons, loading, helping to load, bring ammunition to artillery pieces and things like that. That's where one of these artifacts kind of has an interesting story. Well, an interesting story kind of adjacent to it. So with this fife, now this particular fife in our collection here was carried by Sergeant Alan Easter of the 39th Ohio Infantry during his time here. But the story that I'm about to tell is not necessarily related to this fife in Sergeant Easter, but to another fifer. And that was this gentleman here. So I'm pointing to a black and white picture. There'll be a close-up of him after the program. And this man's name was Allison P Weber. He was a fifer with the 86th Illinois Infantry. And his regiment was located and involved in the fighting at the Dead Angle, or at Cheatham Hill, if you know anything about the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain. Very nasty, terrible fighting there. And when things got really, really rough, instead of continuing in his support role of carrying men off the battlefield in a stretcher, Allison P Weber picks up a Henry rifle, which was a pretty technically advanced rifle for the average soldier at the time, and actually provides cover fire, saving the lives of several of the men in his unit. This action and kind of quick thinking, not to mention the lives that he saved, would earn him one of the Medals of Honors issued here at the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain. There will be a program, hopefully sometime in the future, a little bit more on Mr. Weber and some of the other Medal of Honor recipients. Next in our case here is this drum, and you can see, we'll have again a close-up of it. It is very ornate and actually fairly big. This drum was carried here on the battlefield and was carried by William A. Payton of the 125th Illinois Infantry. They were also involved in the attack at the Dead Angle. Now a drummer, and unlike a fifer, as I mentioned earlier, could actually still be expected to play certain beats and be active as a musician during the battles. So it was and usually these men were in the front, very visible so that everyone could hear them. It was a very dangerous but honorable job. There is a lot more, just like any of these museum tours that we do, we have to crunch these down into kind of manageable bites. And there's a lot more we can say about musicians of the Civil War, of these artifacts of music in the military. But we have to kind of nail it down right now. So I want to thank you for sticking around with us and for attending this other virtual museum tour of ours. As usual, if these programs just kind of whet your appetite and get you hungry for more and you want to learn more about any of the subjects that we talk about, we are always more than willing and more than happy to answer any more questions, go deeper into research, whatever we can do to provide you here at your National Battlefield Park. So with that, I will sign off. I want to say thank you again for attending and listening to me yap. This is Ranger Jake Bowling, Kennesaw Mountain National Battlefield Park. See you next time. A black and white picture of fifer Allison P Weber, discussed in the program as the Medal of Honor winner who dropped his fife and provided cover fire with a Henry rifle at the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain at Cheatham Hill. This is a picture of a Civil War era infantry drum. The drum is wide, spherical, with zigzagging cordage around the outside, along with ornate design showing the unit name and number. This image shows a roughly 1.5 foot long fife, dark brown in color with 2 brass tips.